Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the Oakville Public Library Board meeting for Thursday, February 20th, 2020. That's not right. Rewind. I opened the wrong agenda. This is the board meeting for Thursday, June 4th, 2020. Members of the board, do you have any declarations of pecuniary interest to declare today or conflicts of interest? Seeing none, okay. We have a number of, we have some minutes to approve first. Let me just get to those. We have our minutes of February 20th, 2020. I think that's what I was confused with earlier. And we also have minutes of April 7th and April 29th. Would somebody like to give me a motion to approve those minutes, or are there errors or omissions or discussion on any of the matters in those documents? I'm sorry?
Mr. Chair, just one very minor point, but because this is a library board, I thought I'd mention it.
Sure.
On number 19 of the February 20th minutes, I believe, it's number 19. They use the word fulsome, F-U-L-S-O-M-E. That word has been used extensively by many people, but it's in the wrong context. The word fulsome does not mean what it's supposed to mean. It actually means offensive to good taste. And I encourage the library to look it up.
Well, it's interesting because we had this debate at council, and apparently there's a couple different meanings for it. But we'll take your note because it's.
Yeah, I think the old English was you know, full or comprehensive. But I think modern English says it's not used anymore in that context. Yeah.
Well, We'll accept the change, and we'll have that debate at a in-person library board meeting, because that would be lots of fun. Because we had that same discussion on council. Ironically, we've been using it for years, and then when Mayor Burton was elected, he took me on this issue, and I won.
Yeah, and I got taken on by a lawyer years ago, and he won.
Okay. Well, you don't want to get taken on by a lawyer. Okay, so with the amendment to item, I think you said about page 19?
I think section 19 under CEO update.
Okay, so we can amend that to complete. Yeah. How's that?
Page 18 of 154.
Sure. Okay. Would you give me a motion on the all three of the minutes packages with a February 20th as revised?
I will, yeah. Sure.
Okay, seconded by Bill Smith. Any further comments, questions, errors, or omissions? Bill, did you have something to add? I'm sorry, Bill, you're muted.
Sorry, I was just seconding the...
Oh, thank you. Okay. Okay, all in favor? Hands, thank you, those are carried. We also have, I believe our confidential agenda only has minutes. That's our minutes to approve, right? So can I get a motion to approve the confidential agenda minutes so we can get those out of the way as well? Can somebody give me a motion on those, please?
Sure.
Thanks, Bill. Seconded by Janet. Any discussion, comments, errors, or omissions? Or definition arguments? Okay, all in favor? Confidential minutes are approved. Okay, so going back to the regular agenda, we have a number of items on our consent agenda. We have items 1 through 7. Would anybody like to separate those items first? Yes, Janet? Can somebody unmute Janet, please?
Oh, sorry. I thought I was on mute.
I think you were muted here.
Okay. I would like to separate out 4, 5, and 7.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, can I get a motion then on 1, 2, 3, and 6? Stephen, seconded by Pankage. All in favor? Great. So 1, 3. I should have added 2 to that as well. Sorry. Is that okay, mover and seconder, to add 2? Thank you. So we've just approved items 1, 2, 3, and 6. 1, 2, 3, and 6. So let's start with item number 4 then. That's the intellectual freedom policy. Go ahead, Janet.
So I was not, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
I was not at the February meeting, and so was not really privy to the amount of debate. But when I look at the internet policy and I look at the intellectual freedom policy, I'm a bit perplexed because we talk about hate literature, and we use a phrase in the internet policy about that does put limits and constraints based on criminal actions, if you will. Is there a reason why we don't have that in the intellectual freedom policy?
I think that Tara's going to take that on.
Sure, yeah, we adopt the intellectual freedom policy from the Canadian Federation of Library Associations. So we've adopted what the Federation has listed as the intellectual freedom policy. It is a bit of a balance between the two in that it's expected that if something is criminal, that it falls outside the intellectual freedom. And that's pretty much the way the law works as well. So we want to uphold intellectual freedom and allow people to access whatever they may wish, as long as it follows legal precedent and the law.
But it doesn't say that. Like it says what you've just said, but it doesn't put the caveats in, which the internet policy does.
Exactly.
And listen, I'm born and raised, lots of librarians in the family, lots of people who care about these issues. I just, when it comes to hate literature and criminal activity, I'm not getting why we wouldn't use those words because they are a constraint. And while I respect maybe a larger organization's, their intent, we have two conflicting policies if we approve the internet policy the way it's written right now.
Well, I don't see them as conflicting. I see them as complementary. So the intellectual freedom applies to all different areas of the library, whereas the internet policy applies to the internet. So where we see that when we purchase materials, like for our collections, the challenge becomes that the legal definition of hate. And we've seen that come up significantly about room bookings, right? It's that what does constitute the legal definition of discrimination and the legal definition of some of these things. So we pretty much identify where we need to that is criminal. So we do it within our room booking policy, and we do it within our internet policy. But the intellectual freedom also covers our collections. And there are aspects, although we don't purchase anything that would violate that, there would be people who would argue with that. So we just want to make sure that where we can monitor other people's activity, so room booking and internet, those are in those particular policies, whereas the intellectual freedom is the overarching policy.
But if it's the overarching policy, Tara, then not including that that we would have objections to, I think the words in the internet policy, sorry, when you're trying to do this without a paper version on Zoom, it can get, I think the words in the internet, it says, including provisions of the criminal code regarding obscenity, child pornography, sedition, and the incitement of hate. Well, I'm not getting, maybe I'm, I got other things going on in my head, but I'm not getting why those words cannot be added to the intellectual freedom policy.
So basically what you're asking is for us to develop our own intellectual freedom policy and not follow the ones by our governing organizations.
Well, does your governing organization have any explanation why they would not have provisions, have it in the policy provisions of the criminal code regarding obscenity, child? I mean, those are all things that none of us would ever condone. And so, and they're illegal. So am I missing a statement in the intellectual freedom policy that makes it clear that illegal activities, like maybe I've missed that in the policy? Can any of my board members help me out? So I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to understand. Like, I don't even, yeah.
No, we can go back and we can revisit it. I'm not going to lie, I haven't read this since February.
I'd like to defer
I think
that item.
Sorry, I think
Just,
sorry.
and I'd ask my fellow board members to support me on that. I would, if they've had that debate and they can give us some information, you know, we look around the world today, and you know, a large part of our problem is hate, and it's not that we don't want to have people explore new ideas and new approaches, etc. I'm just concerned that we would not make it 100% clear that intellectual freedom does not allow you to break the law and propagate hate, and let alone child pornography. I mean,
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think it's just the spirit of the different policies, and the spirit of intellectual freedom is really about encouraging intellectual freedom and not necessarily putting it around. But we can definitely take a look at. I know we looked at a number of other public libraries and what they had done, and we had taken best practices. But we can take another look.
well, those are my thoughts for others to consider.
I saw Simona stood up and then sat down again.
Did you wanna speak to it?
Did you want to provide some feedback as well? Feel free.
Okay, come on.
Okay, I just have a question. I'm just wondering, the first, in the appendix, the policy statement is written, and basically it's it captures the statement from the Canadian Federation of Library Associations as well as the one from the Ontario Library Association. So the actual content is all in there. I'm just wondering if you've reviewed all of that content, because it does go into a lot of detail about how it applies, and you know, I didn't see the word hate mentioned in here specifically when I was looking right now, but it does go into a great deal of detail. So I'm just wondering if you've gone through all of those paragraphs to see all of the level of detail that they list.
I did read all 154 pages of the materials for tonight, though. Did I highlight them all? No. And I just made notes on where I had a concern. If you can direct me to how it's covered. Listen, I'm not trying to be difficult. I just, as a community, I don't believe we would want to pass a policy that wouldn't ensure that hate, child pornography, all of those items are excluded. They need to be it needs to be clear, criminal activity is not condoned.
So we can take it back to Culk.
I just want to offer one piece of information that I have on this. So many years ago, I ended up in a bit of a tussle with the library board one of the years I wasn't on there, and it was over this particular issue. And my concern at the time was actually the internet, but I had a long explanation of what intellectual freedom means in terms of the library system. So, and I'm going to try to paraphrase basically what I understood at the time. The criminal code covers these issues. We don't have to cover these issues.
Correct.
That's the way it was explained to me. The concern at the time with codifying it within our own rules is that then you run afoul with people who are going to want to say, well, what about Romeo and Juliet? That's child pornography. And what about Mein Kampf? Mein Kampf is a book about hate, really, but it is also an important text to hold in a library because it's important intellectually. So I can't believe I said Mein Kampf on an open Zoom call, but anyway, it's you understand the point that the library has to have some ability to be able to provide these materials for research.
Of course.
Not that we would have illustrated book on how to do anything that would be illegal, but certainly the ability to be able to have that. So if you have a policy that says we will have nothing on hate or nothing on child pornography, you're going to get in arguments about Romeo and Juliet and Mein Kampf and the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and books like that. So I think that's the way it was explained to me at the time. I accepted it. understanding that the criminal code is very prescriptive on these issues, and so there really is no worry that we can overstep the bounds of what the criminal code dictates. We have to, above our own policy, abide by the criminal code to the letter of the law.
And Jeff, think you explained it better than I did, because that's what I meant when I was saying about, the legal definitions of discrimination. People don't know what they are, and there's a really high rule for that. And when you just have the word discrimination, it gets really blurry, and and even the definition of hate, and some of those, people think they know what it means, but the legal definition's really different. The bar to prove that is really different than what people would think in their head. And we've seen that come out through, the room booking controversies that have happened in Ottawa, Toronto, and Vancouver.
Now, having said all of that, if you, Councillor Hazelfield, if you'd like it to go back, I want you and the board to be comfortable with whatever policy we're going to adopt. These are important decisions that we make as a board, and they're probably some of the most important ones we do make. So if you feel strong, I'm personally comfortable with the way that it's written, but I would support you if you want to proceed with a deferral to seek further guidance on this. Or we could simply ask the staff, we could adopt it and have the staff potentially present on this at a future date, and we could look at amendments at that time. I'm in your hands with this, but I'm happy to support you whichever way that you want to go.
So just because I'd like the opportunity to absorb what you've said, Jeff, and I would like to defer it just for one meeting.
That's fine.
It would give me a greater level of comfort just around why the criminal code words.
Yeah.
I hear you. I'd like to absorb whether or not certain words could be put in that are not that don't blur the lines, but just crystallize that criminal actions are, whether they're dealt by the criminal code. But yes, I'd like to motion to defer it.
That's fine. So I'm happy with that as a solution, as long as your colleagues are as well. So Councillor Hazelfield has moved the deferral, which is not really, deferral's not debatable, is it? No. So it's a non-debatable matter. Is there a seconder for this? Bill's going to second it for you. Actually, several people were going to second it for you, so it seems like a popular idea. I'll call the question on deferral. You wanted to defer for once. Let me ask staff, is it okay for one cycle, or do you need a couple?
No, one should be fine.
Okay, so the deferral is for one cycle, and all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Councillor Hazelfield, you're up for number 5 as well. Oh, hey, and Andrew, sorry. Can I go back to Andrew for a second? Yes,
Just
sir.
a question on the deferral, because this was presented, like it was brought forward for comment in February, and now this was supposed to be the approval after having had the review period. Do we have to begin that process over again?
No.
Okay.
We've
Thank
simply we're essentially time porting to another month from now, so there's no issue.
Good with that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. Councillor Hazelfield, number 5, respectful conduct.
Oh, you're muted.
Respectfully, can you turn on our mic? There we go. There we go.
So on this one, I struggle with why we are not writing a policy that speaks directly to the Canadian Human Rights Code. While it's a pretty simple policy, and it's discrimination and harassment. In this day and age, being more explicit about the rights and freedoms of individuals, and that what really is our governance over that, which is the Human Rights Code, I would like to see the Human Rights Code written in there, even if it's just the areas in which there's protections, because we live in a place, in a world where not everybody, looks at the world openly, and when we just generalize the Human Rights Code, I think we diminish the quality of the quality of the standard that we should uphold. And I get that this is how the town has directed. I don't agree with the town's approach to policies in this regard. I think we do need to be more explicit. So on this one, I would like, whether it's a deferral or I'd like to ask that the Human Rights Code be inserted, or at least the protected grounds. And then my second part is that it talks about providing a procedure to address concerns and issues. But again, it doesn't say what that procedure is. So Tara, if you could help me out.
Sure. As you note, this is completely based on the town's policy. So we can definitely take a look at, maybe have some discussion with the town about updating that to reflect that, or look about just taking a little bit of a different tact for the library that would differ from the town's policy. As for the second piece, traditionally procedures don't come to the board. They're operational. Traditionally, the board approves policy and operationalizes the procedures through that.
Can I also, I just want to point out, Councillor Hazatili, I'm sure you've read this, but you're probably not satisfied with it, which is why you're raising it, but I just want to bring it to your attention just in case. On page 1 of the respectful conduct policy, it does refer to 3 pieces of relevant legislation: the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Ontario Human Rights Code, as well as Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. So that is specifically referenced by statute on that page. Is that, you want something over and above that?
I would like to see that the protected grounds are delineated out in the policy statement. We have voluminous amounts of legislation that our citizens all have to comply with. We should be very crystal clear about the importance of those protected grounds in regards to respectful conduct. It makes it, it resonates more with people rather than just a general statement. Lots of people have, stood up and said, I don't discriminate. I'm not going to harass. But when you call out those grounds, some people are a little surprised. They don't realize all of the different elements that are covered. And why wouldn't we call those out when we want a society that really upholds the code, and we want a workplace that upholds the code?
So you're looking to have those called out within the policy, not just the procedures?
Within the policy statement. I understand the operational procedures are yours. I would like to understand what those operational procedures are, because it's one thing to have a policy, but the reality is if the procedure doesn't line up with the policy, then, and we never hear about that procedure, then, our governance is not all there. So, but again.
Okay, any other comment on this? Because I want to weigh in on this, but I want to give everybody else a chance. Okay, so I don't disagree with the sentiment that you're expressing here. My concern is when you paraphrase or in any way extrapolate legislation, you run the risk of creating confusion around interpretation, I find, which is why I personally, even in my own company, and most things, even when I've written motions, I usually then refer back to the actual legislation, to the actual text, the legislation and the regulations. So I mean, the Ontario Human Rights Code is obviously an incredibly important piece of legislation, but so is the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, as well as other pieces of legislation, the Employment Standards Act, the Labor Act, et cetera. My concern is if you start to extrapolate and pull out what you want, are you saying those things in the exclusion of other clauses? Are you adding to it? Why do you have to redefine what's already there in legislation and clear? That's my 2 cents worth. I like having policies that are clear to understand with track back to actual reference legislation. That's kind of the way my way of doing business, because there's no better way, there's nothing more important there's no important source text than the original legislation for interpretation purposes. My 2 cents, anyway. Anything further? Okay, Janet, how do you want to proceed with this? Would you like to seek something further on this, or how do you want to somebody give me a motion on this matter?
I'd like to motion that we defer it for consideration of what additional language we could add to highlight the critical importance of the code.
Okay. Is that clear enough to staff, or would you like more clarification on that?
Just curious, do you want us to bring back a new updated policy, or do you want us to bring back multiple, like this one and one with different options? I'm just trying to figure out what you'd be expecting next round.
I would look for, I mean, obviously this one could come back, but I would like to see a draft that was a bit more comprehensive around defining the discrimination, harassment, and using the code.
Okay.
Andrew has a question.
Yeah, I think, I mean, not dissimilar to, I mean, Jeff, your question, asking Janet about what the aim is here. I'm just wondering, Janet, would it, because this is, we're talking about one specific policy right now, but as you point out, I mean, we all support those pieces of legislation and the codes and the acts that provide that framework. Would you be more comfortable with another policy statement to the effect that the library and the board, et cetera, explicitly endorse, the Ontario Human Rights Code, the AODA, et cetera? Like, is it an independent policy statement just saying that we fully support and expect everyone to abide by these? Or is it something that you want to encode in any specific policy that might have some overlap with that?
So Andrew, what you just said is a lot more detailed than what this actually says. So even that could be incorporated in it just to highlight that compliance to the spirit and intent of those. I could even get my head around that a bit more than what we currently have.
Okay.
Well, okay, and the reason I mean, because this specifically says, that it's in the framework of having employees free from discrimination and harassment. So it's the respectful conduct policy, but we could, I presume, write up another policy that basically says what you just said, that we endorse the spirit and the rule of the other acts and codes. I'm just trying to find out, I guess what the desired outcome is.
My desired outcome after 30 years of human resources is that a policy, when it's read by a staff member or a customer or other, and in this case, a staff member, truly resonates the spirit and intent and support of important legislation that protects them, so that they never can have to question that we are 100% behind that legislation and will fulfill our obligations, and hopefully more than that, in how we treat them.
That's very well said. Would you want to include that in the occupational health, safety, and workplace violence policy, and also the respectful workplace policy as well? I guess is this something we should look at including in every policy that's related? Or does it stand on it? Like, should we have it independent? I don't know if there's a legislative, preference for one or the other. But you have a lot more familiarity than I do, obviously, with human rights legislation.
Well, we're a lot more specific in the occupational health and safety and workplace violence policy. Not greatly, but we are. I think that's why I'm asking for a deferral. I'd like people to consider my comments and staff to come back with something that might be more fulsome, that would speak to that spirit and intent.
Sorry, Pankage. Okay, well, do you, let's. Is it anybody else want to jump in on this? Okay, you want to give us a motion then, see what we can do? Just, do you want to just defer a motion for one cycle for additional information as per staff direction? Is that okay, Janet? Okay. Would somebody like to second that for me? Okay. Okay, Andrew? Anybody else want to speak to it? I just want to make a comment. I'm going to support the deferral, but I do understand and respect the spirit of what Councillor Hazelfield is trying to achieve here. I don't have the same level of concern, because if you get right down to it, we literally, if we're going to start opening up legislation and explaining it in our context on this particular policy, you're going to have to do that across the board, whether it's the Ontario Libraries Act, whether it's the Labour Standards Act, whether it's the Labour Code, any piece of legislation that and even for that matter, same as last time, it's a similar issue as last time. The criminal code clearly identifies what's hate, what's child pornography, what is, what contravenes the criminal code under that particular section. So rewriting it, I think it's unnecessary, but, again, I want Councillor Hazelfield and everybody to be 100% comfortable with these policies, because they are our policies. And so for that purpose, I will support it. But I am satisfied with the level of work and that has been done to this point. But we'll see what comes back. You can always plus things, always make it better. All in favor of the motion that's been presented? I need fulsome hands. Oh, that's carried, thank you. Okay, we're moving on to item number 6 was approved, so we're moving on to number 7, internet access and accessible use. Councillor Hazelfield.
I just had separated it out because I wanted to make sure that whatever we're approving in the internet access policy was recognizing what was in the intellectual freedom. So I have no other comments on it.
So does that mean that you're prepared to give me a motion to approve this, or do you want this deferred to come back with the other matter?
I will motion to pass this one.
Okay, go ahead. So you're moving it?
Yep.
Thank you. Seconded by? Somebody? Susan, thank you. All in favor? That's carried. Great. So we've finished our consent agenda. Let's move on to discussion items. First on the agenda is item number 8, which is the Oakville Public Library financial statements and audit report. So who is going to, do we have somebody online that's going to present that to us, or who's?
Yeah, John is on.
John's on?
John's on the Zoom. On the Zoom.
I do not see John. There's John. Hello, John.
Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing tonight?
Yay.
All right, that means you can hear me. All right, so I am here to talk about a couple things tonight. There are 2 motions actually on my staff report. Mm-hmm. The first is to get the board's approval on the 2019 financial statements, and the second is the receipt of the auditor's report for those financial statements. I believe this is on page 59 of your package. And we are joined by our external auditors from KPMG tonight, and I'll be passing the proverbial mic to them in a moment so they can talk about their audit work. But before I do, I wanted to highlight a few things for the board in relation to the 2019 library financial statements. So the first thing to point out is that the library posted a surplus in 2019, and they did that both operationally and for the audited statements. And there's a bit of a distinction between those two. Most of the financial conversation that you have around the board table relates to operational results, and that's good and that's appropriate, but there are a few differences between the operational ones and those that are included within the audited financial statements that you'll be approving tonight. So just to highlight a couple of those for you, one of them relates to your collections, the acquisition of your collections. Those operationally, those are viewed as an expense. However, on the audited financial statements, those are viewed as a capital asset, and they are amortized over the useful life of the collection. It also means that amortization is included within the audited statements, but not the operational statements. Another difference is the inclusion of a liability for post-employment benefits, and this is an expense and a liability on your audited statements, but not operationally. And the third area to point out is, in addition to the library's operational results, the library also maintains 2 funds. One is called the Development Reserve Fund, and the other is called the Oakville Community Foundation Funds. And the income and expenses of those funds are not part of the operational results. but they are part of the financial statement. So any revenues that are there, any expenses that they may have get added in, but they're not part of the operational results, primarily for tax levy impact purposes. So the second item to bring to your attention is that this year's financial statements had an adjustment for the prior years due to an error in how the donations in that development reserve fund that I just mentioned, and how they were being accounted for. And I'll try to make a long story short here. The majority of the donations in this fund are available to the library with no restrictions placed on them by the donors. That was not always the case going back many, many years. Over time, the nature of those donations changed. They used to be much more what we call restricted. Now they're much more unrestricted or general. And the accounting didn't change as the nature of those donations changed. This happened over many years, a lot of small dollar transactions. So when town finance staff took a look at it this past year, we worked with the library's development staff and with the auditors to determine whether we had the correct understanding, and we figured out the proper accounting treatment for it. And so we've adjusted this year accordingly. We worked closely with KPMG. They were happy with the work that we did. And so that's why you see that adjustment on this year's financial statements. So now that's very detailed accounting stuff. So hopefully I haven't put you all to sleep with that. I'm going to turn it over to KPMG in just a minute. They'll run through a couple of things with their audit report. But before I do, does anyone have any specific questions on the financial statements themselves or on my staff report that they'd like to talk to or talk about?
Members of the board, questions? Nope.
Jonathan, thank you very much. And by the way, congratulations on a clean audit. And hi, Matthew and Lois. I have questions on the audit findings report, so I can wait for Matthew and Lois to run through that. But I did have one other comment or question. You mentioned that, I think we talk about derivatives later on in one of the reports. And it struck me that if the endowment funds that are professionally managed use derivative instruments, is that supposed to be reported or required to be reported by the library?
So under PSAB, there is no financial instrument framework right now. That is coming, I believe, in 2 year ends. I've actually been attending some webinars on it because it's going to be lots of fun and it's going to have a bunch of disclosure. And derivatives, they have a couple of webinars just on derivatives. So nothing that we have to do right now as a portfolio investment. And to be honest, I'd have to know the details of that portfolio investment. We'll have to go through that exercise to figure out whether we even have that level of detail. But it would be picked up, I think, for the 2021 year end. But Lois and Matt can confirm that when they can turn their mics on.
Thank you.
And you had another question, but you're going to hold that until after the audit report?
Yeah, I can ask it now or wait until Matthew and Lois run through the audit findings report.
Let's wait till after the audit findings report because maybe they'll get answered there.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else for Jonathan? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to our audit team.
All right, so Lois Ouellette is the audit partner and Matt Chiardelli is the audit manager. And they've worked very closely with us on the library's audit as well as the town's audit. They're very familiar with us. And I will hand it over to them. I think Cassie might have to turn their mics on, but we should be good to go.
Yes, we are good to go. Our mics are turned on. So thank you for inviting us to the meeting tonight. We're happy to attend virtually and happy to go through our audit findings report. So we're getting rather good at doing these virtually. So we'll take you through. Now, the audit findings report, we have the version that we sent out to you. So our page numbers, when I refer to a page number, will be the number printed on the bottom of the findings report, as opposed to the numbering system you're using in your package. So I'm starting on page 1, the executive summary. The purpose of the report is to assist you in your approval of the financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2019. The scope of our audit was to audit, obviously, the financial statements and the underlying accounting records that were prepared by management. As a result of performing our audit, we've completed most of the audit procedures, and I say most. We have a list on page 1 of the procedures that are still outstanding. These are procedures that are typically outstanding at this point in an audit because they can't be performed until after this meeting. So, and one of those procedures is having this discussion with you. It's required under the auditing standards, Canadian auditing standards. And so that's part of completing an audit for us. But based on what we've done thus far, and once we perform those remaining procedures, we are prepared to issue the draft audit report that is in your package, and we'll issue that in final form. If there is any matters of any significance that come up as a result of performing these remaining procedures, we will circle back to you and let you know what those are, and that giving you an opportunity to review it. I'm going to let Matt take you through the audit risks and results in a moment. Just to go over, we do a number of procedures. We highlighted in our audit plan that we would perform certain procedures. So we'll give you a brief update on the results of those procedures. We do take a look at accounting estimates because they are they're a higher risk because they're estimates. So we do perform procedures over the accounting estimates, which Matt will speak to more fully. And in particular, the most significant accounting estimate that is in your financial statements is with respect to the post-employment benefit liability. There were no new accounting standards that were implemented in the financial statements this year, so the accounting practices and policies in the financial statements are consistent with last year. And so consistency is a pillar of financial reporting, so I'm happy to report that the financial statements were prepared on a consistent basis. I'm going to let Matt talk about the audit adjustments as well as the control and other observations. With respect to independence, I'm on page 3 of our report now. On an annual basis, we're required to report back to you on independence. We evaluate independence throughout the audit process, and we look at independence from the point of view of the services that we have performed for the organization, as well as the relationship between our team and your team. So I'm happy to report that we have concluded that we are independent of the library. So Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Lois. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I see that my connection's been a bit choppy, so I apologize in advance if I slow down and Lois has to step back in for me. But I'll do my best to go while my internet holds up. So picking up where Lois left off on page 4 there, talking about the audit risks and results, we'll start off with government grants. Obviously that represents a significant portion of annual funding, and very easy for us to obtain, substantive audit evidence in this area because access to third-party confirmations and proof of receipt of those funds is very straightforward. We also do a little bit of analytics as well to back that up. We did not have anything significant to report in this area, so I will skip ahead to page 5. Which is a little more discussion worthy. So page 5, we're going to speak on the post-employment benefit liability. So as Lois alluded to, this is considered the most significant area of estimate within the financial statement. And in 2019, a full new valuation was performed by the third-party actuary, and that holds true for both the town and the library staff as well. These usually occur every 3rd year, and when they do, we work with management to number one, vet the data that was sent over to the actuary to make sure that they are creating their report with a solid starting point. We did not have any issues based on our review of those inputs. And then we also go to HR records and employee files in order to do that. So again, nothing to report on that side. Once we're comfortable with that data, we look at the report itself after the actuaries produced it, and we do a little bit of benchmarking on all of the significant assumptions. Typically, it is the mortality table and discount rates. They're the biggest drivers of change for their reporting. And based on our work, we're comfortable that the rates that they're using and the expectations for mortality are in line with those that we would expect for the space. So a little bit extra work spent there this year. That work will also prop up the actuaries' reporting over the next 2 years until another full valuation is performed in 3. Moving on to the next page, page 6, operating expenses. So obviously in any audit, particularly one of this nature, we do a little bit of substantive work over any accrued expenses at year end, and then over expenses flowing through as well. We take a combined approach, both trend analysis and substantive specific item sampling. So essentially what we do is we look for outliers and focus our testing on some areas that we feel need a little more attention, but we also do look at areas that do not outlie, just to make sure we have a good spread. One thing worth noting here, the last bullet on the page. So there was something that management brought to our attention sort of in the closing days of the audit. And it was that there was a vendor or two that had not made invoices available to management prior to compiling the records for year end. So this is really not necessarily something that it was within management's control. A call was put out to vendors prior to year end as part of the standard close process. And it's our understanding that this vendor simply didn't meet that call, and in absence of anything sent from them, it would be difficult to estimate any outstanding invoices. So that ended up being corrected. The financial statements contain all of that. So no issue, just something a little bit unusual. And we thank management for bringing that to our attention in a timely manner and working with us to make sure the statements include those items. Flipping to page 7, I won't spend much time here. Lois alluded to the fact that there were no new disclosures or policy changes. The statements are consistent with the prior year, and we consider that all the disclosure in there is adequate based on the guidance. Page 8, so our adjustments and differences. Really, it's just the prior period item that John already spoke to in his overview of the results. So I won't retread his ground there too much, but you'll see the actual impact to that prior period is summarized here. And what it ultimately amounts to is taking amounts that were previously sitting as deferred revenue liabilities and taking them into accumulated surplus, because that is where they would have been if this were caught in the prior period. A small amount did flow through the income statement in the prior year, but the majority was closed directly to surplus. And really at the end of this current year, it does bring the surplus position to the same spot it would have been. So on a go-forward basis, this is correct and in the past. We did modify our approach a little bit after this was brought to our attention. So we took a deeper dive, and as John mentioned, we worked with his team and management of the library just to make sure we understand their new process. It seems like they took really a comprehensive dive and went line by line here. So we are relatively satisfied that we've captured this issue in full at this point, because it was not so much one large item, but a series of very small ones that accumulated over time. And like I said, that control process has been touched up quite a bit and tightened up on a go-forward basis to avoid similar errors in the future. On the bottom of the page there, no uncorrected differences, nothing above our posting threshold that would warrant disclosure to you in the meeting other than the corrected item we just discussed. If we go to page 9, this is really piggybacking off of that same topic. And again, John mentioned the reason that this arose, and it's just because that some funds that did not carry external restriction in the past could have been recognized as revenues over time, but just the process in place missed a few of those. So again, as I said, we're confident management has a plan in place and that the control process there is much stronger on a go forward than in the past. And also we acknowledge that I think there was some employee turnover over the past few years that may have attributed the issue. Just a lot of new faces not taking a fully deep dive as occurred this year. So that's the only control observation we had as a result of the audit, and it does go hand in hand with that prior period item we talked about. After that, really just the standard appendices in our report, but I do want to highlight a couple of items. Page 10 obviously talks about COVID-19, which I'm sure we've all spent far too much time considering the implications of lately, both from a business perspective and not. KPMG has plenty of resources to help with managing some of that transition. So if there's anything that management feels we might be able to assist with, please do.
Looks like we might have lost Matt. He got through most of his presentation. I would like to just add that KPMG has developed a return to work guide, and that isn't listed on this page because it came out after the report was issued to you. So Matt, you're not.
Whether that thing else, happy to help on any.
We're doing a duel. So just turning the page to page 11, we've provided you with some current developments and audit trends. This is just highlighting some of the accounting standards that are going to be coming into play. We've got quite a few coming our way starting in 2021. As John mentioned, the financial instruments, which will impact derivative accounting, the measurement of the investment values, and in fact embedded derivatives in ordinary contracts that may have to come onto the balance sheet. So a fair bit of work here depending on what's going on. The revenue standard will be a brand new standard, not effective until the December 2022 year end. And that standard, currently the accounting standards in public sector accounting standards include standards on tax revenue, on government grants, those kind of things, but there's nothing about ordinary revenue, like the fees and service charges that a library would charge its patrons. So this revenue standard will give accountants some guidance on how to account for those type of transactions. The employee future benefit obligations is being revisited by the policymakers, and there have been some new employee future benefits that are in the municipal sector and in the government sector. So the revisions to these standards will address those new types of benefit plans. And so currently those ones are still in a very early stage of development, and we don't have a due date yet for those. We've also provided you with some thought leadership that KPMG has developed just for your information and reading, and that's highlighted on page 12. So that's our report, and we're happy to answer your questions.
COVID-19 related items. I wouldn't speak to this too much, but I do just want there, so hopefully no headache when we were talking over each other.
Yes, you cut out for quite a while there.
But what you said was riveting. Until we lost you. Members of the board, any questions for Lois or potentially Matthew?
Mr. Chair, just one question.
Go for it.
You've already answered the question that I had on derivatives, so thank you for that. But on page 10 of your package, I was just curious as to why you specifically mentioned the change in time of use pricing.
Sorry, whereabouts is that mentioned?
Yeah, page 10 of your package, the second sentence says, the immediate change in time of use pricing outside the usual timing for updating rates further highlight the ever-changing impact of COVID-19. I was just struck by, why is that?
We cut and pasted that page.
Okay, all right. So
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I couldn't figure out the relevance, so that's fine. Thank you.
Other than it's going to save you a bit of money.
Maybe, but all their buildings are shut.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions for the audit team? Okay. Seeing none, I will go back to the first page. There are two recommendations that the draft financial statements for OPL for the year dated December 31st, 2019 be approved, and that two, the KPMG audit findings report for year ended December 31st, 2019 be received for information. Can somebody give me a motion to activate those two clauses? I see Bill moving to, it's Pankage. Would somebody else like to second? And it's Bill. And any further discussion, comments, questions? All in favor? Hands, thank you. That is carried. Thank you to our auditors for another great year. Appreciate it. And we're going to move on to...
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And good luck with your internet, Matthew.
Thanks. Coach getting an angry bill.
Okay, we're moving on to item number 8, item number 9, our year-to-date financial status indicators.
Yeah, so the board will remember back in February, we brought you the January financial indicators, but it's been a few months since you got to see them. So these are the updated ones as of April 30th. So you will notice that as we indicated in the January, we were running a bit of a surplus as part of our full-time salaries due to some vacancies. Those vacancies are now filled, but they weren't for the first couple months. So you will see that that attributes significantly to the surplus that we're currently running. I'll also remind the board that our part-time staff were put on declared emergency as of April 20th. So that result of that financial impact would not necessarily be overly seen on this. So we are running a surplus as of the end of April. That was primarily a result of operations that we had under normal circumstances. The next time we meet, we'll get a better sense of where we are as a result of some of the COVID impacts that we've seen as a result of some of the putting the part-time staff on declared emergency leave. I will also just flag as well the collections purchases. That's quite a bit higher for a couple different reasons. One is we've done a pretty significant concentration on ebooks with our physical collections not being accessible. And there is some differential between what it costs for us to buy a physical book and what it costs for us to buy a digital book. However, that is expected to be managed within the collections envelope. There is a little bit of a spike you see here, and that's purely because the purchase that we do with our ebook vendor is front-loaded. So we basically create an open PO that they purchase against all year. And that PO is been put in the beginning of the year instead of being spread out over the full 12 months. So we're working with purchasing and finance to just sort that out so the variance isn't so prompt at the front of the year. So that's why you're seeing that being higher. But I'm happy to take questions.
Okay. Members of the board, any questions for Tara? Janet? Please unmute Councillor Hazlethiel.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We can hear you now.
Okay. So in the last presentation, they talked about a vendor who didn't submit their invoices on time. And the only reason that would concern me is because it's great that it was caught and there's the due diligence on the back end, but is that same vendor have a potential to affect the results that you are showing us in these updates?
No, once we identified the fact that we had outstanding invoices from 2019, they reopened the budget from 2019, and that was that adjustment. So it did not impact the 2020 budget. We reopened the 2019 and made that adjustment back to the previous year. So
we continue to use that. We use that vendor still? We do.
We've had some conversations with them, and we're confident that we've resolved some of the communication issues.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything further? Steve.
Hello, everyone, and apologies for earlier getting up. My back is absolutely killing me from an accident a couple days ago, so I can't sit still for very long. This was just a quick comment more than anything else. Under key facts, and you'll pardon me for saying this as a writer, those aren't really facts, that's just the purpose. Those 3 points there, number 9, the key facts about monitoring, and we're providing financial reports and stuff like that. I would just suggest those aren't facts as such.
Okay.
Well, they are, but
right.
You know what I mean. I was thinking more information and implications than purpose, but anyway, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, no, I'll take that back to Belinda for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further? Did I see Bill's hand? Nope. Okay, I'll look for motion to approve item number 9. Pankage, seconded by Steve. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Item number 10, Q1 2020 Performance and Measures Report.
So I'm just going to start by saying that generally speaking, this report, the quarterly report, is in the consent agenda. And at this time, we did not put it in the consent agenda. And primarily it's because over the last 2 weeks in March, all library branches were closed. And so the information presented in the report, it is, the comparison to 2019 is impacted by the closure. And so we wanted to provide an opportunity to the board to ask any questions they might have of the specific numbers presented, and so on. So the closure is the most significant factor in the comparison to 2019. In addition to that, Glen Abbey Library was closed from June 2nd, 2019 up until January 27th, 2020. So that has an impact as well. On a good note, Family Day was very successful at both Iroquois Ridge and Glen Abbey. The report follows the typical template and presents the usual statistics that we present on a quarterly basis to the board. And I'm happy to take any questions on any of the sections presented here.
Okay. Any questions? Oh, Janet, go ahead.
Thank you for this. It's actually kind of fascinating to see that digital circulation was -2%, even though I know how hard you and your team worked on the virtual services. So that was a bit surprising for me to see. My call out on this report is, and I continue to be concerned about it, is that we have a very small branch at Clearview, and you can see that the circulation is low. We don't provide operating hours for that branch when we are able to be open that support a greater level of engagement with the library. And I hope that we can talk about that at the strategic plan, because as you can see the numbers, it's pretty darn low. And it is a community that should benefit from having a library there. So for future discussion at strat plan, it's a bit shocking how low that is.
Okay, comments? Further comments? Janet, do you have any action on that particular comment, or are you just stating it for the record?
Well, I'm stating it as because at some point we will get to a strategic plan, and I think, you know, when you look at this kind of circulation and you think about the use of our different locations and services, it's a bit of a misnomer when you see the low circulation. So I was just calling it out because at some point we're going to talk about the strategic plan, and I think it's a factor we need to consider.
Okay, thank you. And staff will take note of that.
Yep.
Thank you. Would you like to move the item then, Councillor Hazelfield?
Sure.
Thank you. It's moved, seconded by? Susan, thank you. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, special activity report.
Okay,
Item number 11.
So this one is basically similar to the previous one, the quarterly. Clearly, it only covers a 2-month period from March the 14th, which was the first day that all library branches and OPL Express locations were closed, up until May 10th, which is the closest date that we could come up to before we could get the package ready for this board meeting. So the purpose of this report is to provide a summary of activity that the library has been engaged in over the last 2 months after the closure. There is clearly an overlap here in terms of numbers presented in the Q1 report for the last 2 weeks in March. And also there is an overlap here on numbers that will be presented to you in the typical Q2 report. However, the purpose is to provide you with up-to-date information on the activity and not wait until the Q2 report is going to be available. So during the closure of the branches and of OPL Express, OPL continued to deliver services virtually and to allow for customers to register for library cards in order so that they could have access to our digital collection. In the report, I have outlined a number of key facts, and the appendix provides the actual numbers for you. So just a few highlights. I will not go over every single paragraph in the report. We have started allowing customers to register for library cards shortly after the closure. And although we did not have an automated system in place through our website, as other libraries do, we facilitated that through our Ask Us through our OPL reference via email, and customers could also call and leave voicemails. We had received a really positive response from the community, people who were looking to either renew their library cards or get new library cards so they could access digital content. In addition to that, we have made some changes to access to our digital collections in terms of removing some barriers, increasing some limits. One fact to note is the Ancestry database, which traditionally only offers access to customers from the library, has opened up access to customers remotely. That is still available right now. We have to check and see how much longer. I believe June 30th was the date that they provided. But that database has seen a tremendous amount of use because of this. Since staff were unable to connect with customers in a physical environment, we started offering book talks on YouTube. So those would be staff members talking about favorite books. And you know, from what we were able to gather, at least 65% of those titles were checked out on Cloud Library. And just to note, it is rather challenging to be able to see those checked out on Hoopla, but they have basically been checked out by customers. So the book talks have worked clearly. In addition to that, we invited local authors to do a video, and we posted it on our YouTube channel. The YouTube channel started with 79 subscribers on the day of our first online story time, and as of May 26 was at 402 subscribers. We deliver online story time through YouTube as well as Instagram. We've done a number of creation challenges on Facebook. We launched stories by phone just in May, so there's not a lot of statistical information on that. And in terms of programming, we continue to refine the programming that we're offering to the community. Started with family story times. The Kids Library Club, which is for school-age children, is extremely popular, and that's an area that we're looking at expanding, particularly when it comes to summer and summer reading. And just to note that we look closely at all of the numbers that are presented to you on a regular basis and all the numbers that we gather in order to be able to make decisions and move quickly and adjust the service level. Tech Help has been another has got a lot of great response from the community, where customers could connect with us via the phone through Skype and get help with either digital resources or Gmail and so on, things that they would have traditionally got help with in the library. So this is, in summary, the information presented here. As I mentioned, everything is, all of the numbers that we have at the moment are presented in Appendix A, keeping in mind that Q2 report will, include some of this information and more. And by that point in time, we will be able to have a more comprehensive report in terms of our programming statistics, virtual programming statistics.
Okay. Any questions for Simona? Janet. Unmute Councillor Haslett-Field. Thank you.
I just want to say that what an outstanding job in terms of pivoting and trying to offer as much as you could to the public. You all deserve a standing ovation for the creativity, for the genuine care and concern you've shown to the people who, really embrace the library as their home. And so really well done.
Thank you.
Anything further? I just want to echo the comments. I mean, I keep hearing in the community all the time. I get the privilege of taking credit for everything. No, I'm just kidding. I've been hearing so much positive about what you folks are doing at the library, and I'm so proud of this organization, from the virtual programming to the seed library and everything in between. Well done. Congratulations on a terrific report and a terrific pivot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members of the board, can I get a motion to receive this report, please? Bill and Andrew, all in favor? And that is carried. Okay, item number 12.
Yes, I'm very pleased to bring to the board OPL's recovery strategy. I have a presentation that I'm going to go through just to kind of keep me on track. Perfect. So as I highlight in the strategy, hold on. There we go. We created this kind of chart to really govern our approach, and I'm hoping that the board will approve in principle. And I say approve in principle because things keep changing and they keep shifting. And so this is our overarching strategy that will guide us as we develop the actual detailed plans. We've done this as part of phase 1 with the introduction of materials return and our library takeout service, which I'll speak to, but then just highlights our approach as we move forward into a full recovery, which you can see down at the end in terms of the new service model. So this document is in full. I just have the first page for you in the appendix of this report, and really just highlights what are the key pieces of each one of those phases, what are the key services that'll be offered, what continues through, and then what gets added and what considerations we need to take. So I'm going to go through each one of these phases individually. Okay. So phase 1, as I just mentioned, includes the resumption of materials return and the introduction of library takeout or holds pickup. So we're starting with limited hours and limited locations to start. Glen Abbey, Iroquois Ridge, and Woodside are the locations that we've identified representing the east, west, and south. It'll start open to the public from 11:30 to 7, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Saturdays from 9:30 to 5. Customers will place their holds as usual And they'll get notified, and as part of that notification, they'll be asked to select a pickup slot. The pickup slots are currently 30 minutes. The customers arrive during that 30-minute window, approach the branch that they've chosen to pick up their materials at, go into the vestibule where they'll grab their holds and leave. All the items will be pre-checked out, so it is just a quick grab and go. And then we'll basically look at the expansion of services based on demand as we kind of get a feel for what that will be. We're uncertain, as I've kind of highlighted in the report, what the pickup will be. We expect some high traffic to start with because we know that people are looking to get a changeover. And there's always that solid 20% of library users that are really anxious to get back and be able to access those services. What'll be interesting is once that initial kind of drive comes through, what is that demand? And then once we have that more of established baseline, we'll look at and see how we can bring other branches online and start to expand those services. It's also dependent a little bit on the province as it enables us to move forward. As the board will remember, we closed, but then we were closed by provincial order. So we are at the whim of, or the will of the province about what steps we can take to come back. But these are the steps that we are allowed to take to date, so we're very excited to offer this. This starts next week on Tuesday. Staff that have been recalled from declared emergency leave to deliver these services have a training day tomorrow where we'll go over the new services as well as just a reintroduction to the branches as a whole. They've been off for 10 plus weeks, so it's good to bring them back in and kind of remind them of everything and go through all the health and safety and all the procedures. That way we can start on Tuesday. I will also mention that the materials return will operate the same hours as the library takeout. And I do actually have some images of what those communications will look like at the end. So phase one will also include the resumption of collection services to allow new physical materials to be received and loaned out to customers. I will point out that this is pending approval. As I've outlined for you in the report, we are following the town process for returning services. So that is expected to go to the return to service team next week, as potentially is the summer reading. We're looking to launch our summer reading program, which we normally do in person, but obviously that isn't possible, so we're excited to move it online. We've brought forward an app called Beanstack in order to be able to do that. It's kind of nicknamed Fitbit for reading, and it really allows us to engage with readers as they go through all the different activities and reading throughout the summer. So that'll be launched mid-June. And as part of that, we're looking to bring back additional programming staff in order to be able to support this. As Simona hinted at, our school-age programs have been extremely successful, and they have pretty significant wait lists to them. So bringing back staff in order to fully grow this, because there's obviously a demand in the public, is an important part of phase one, but that is also pending approval to the town process. So after phase one, phase two is to increase access just a little bit further, and what we mean by that is basically bringing the OPL Express locations back online. We do know that the recreation centers are looking to come back, I do believe in July. I think there was leave for summer camps to come, so those should reopen at some point in July. So we will get access to the OPL Express locations, at least at the QEP and the 16-mile sports complex. We still have to wait for St. Luke's, but definitely the goal is once we have access to that is another pickup point, another location for customers to be able to access our services. QEP also will have the novel branch location. So we added in addition to the lockers, a browsing solution that's not fully up and running, but once we get access to those spaces, again, we can look at bringing that back up or introducing that. And yeah, we do have a 4th set of lockers at Central that's waiting for deployment. So once, again, some of those rec centers or those other public facilities come up, we can look at another location to have another set of lockers out to begin to allow even further access to materials and services. Phase 3 will require the provincial order to be lifted and allow the public access to our physical spaces. What we are expecting or assuming that could look like, that it would still might be limited branches, limited hours, limited services, and limited number of customers. Really, we're following the guidelines that are provided to us by various different agencies. I do know that we've been looking at the retail guidelines because there is a certain amount of people per square foot that are required, so that would help guide some of that. Some of the services that we would look to as part of Phase 3 would be access to public computers, likely by appointment. We know that this is a very much needed solution. There are a number of residents that do not have ready access to computers, so this will be one of the ones that we concentrate on. Printing services, mobile printing only, so right now, you have the ability to send your print job to a library through an app. So that's how that will be processed there. We'll bring our reference service back on, as well as our Reader's Advisory Service. There'll be likely no customer access to stacks, so it would be a return to the Library of Old for a little bit with restricted stacks, but staff would be happy to talk through with the customers and then go get the books for them. At that point, we don't expect that there would be access to meeting rooms, study spaces, or in-person programs during this phase, but virtual programming and all services from Phase 1 and 2 would continue. Phase 4 is much more a resumption of full services, although with still some limitations. It would include all branches, an increase in hours if required to get us back to pre-COVID timelines. And additional services would come online, such as access to study spaces, access to meeting rooms, controlled access to stacks, increase in number of customers that will be allowed into our spaces, access to printers and scanners, and potentially the introduction of in-person programming. Obviously, when I say limited, that's limited space in there as one of the things that we are looking at as part of all of this is what do our built spaces look like now and how can they be adapted to fit the potential requirements that we will have to meet in order to open to the public in terms of physical distancing in our study spaces and meeting rooms, et cetera. So that is all being looked at. And of course, we are keeping in mind that at any point OPL could revert to a previous phase should it be necessary. We monitor along with the town the numbers daily that come out of the province and are prepared should it be necessary to revert if the province is required to do so. So in Phase 5, it entails all branches open with post-COVID hours and full access to the branch and services. Although the services will be accessible, there may be changes to support what library services will look like in a post-COVID world. We're working with all of our technology vendors, and actually just not our technology vendors, but all our vendors across the board to really adapt our current technologies to support a touchless environment for customers or where else we can kind of leverage technology to benefit our customers by allowing them access to services in a way that is safe given our circumstances. But it will likely be that what will happen during the first 4 phases will help us envision what Phase 5 will look like, because that is more of a long-term kind of guide. I think as I highlight in here, one of the things we can expect is, we didn't offer a significant amount of virtual programming post-COVID, but I can definitely see us maintaining an amount moving forward. It's just what is that balance? And I know that the programming team is working hard on what that could be and what's working and what's not working and what should we adopt long-term in terms of that. I'll also just speak really quickly to the key assumptions. One of the challenges with these plans is that everything does continue to shift quickly. So I just wanted to highlight both to the board as well as to the public, what are the key assumptions that are driving the different phases. So definitely providing safe service is a key one. Enhanced cleaning, so working with town facilities to make sure that when people access our facilities, whether staff or whether the public, that they will not be contaminated. Everything is cleaned up to the level that is expected. Access to sanitizers and appropriate source control. And I did put the asterisks there because in the document it was appropriate PPE, but I just wanted to highlight that there's been a bit of a change in mentality to that, in that we're not really speaking about personal protective equipment because that really speaks to medical grade masks and such, and that's not what would be provided as part of the library. It is more of personal cloth masks or such, which is really about protecting others, not personal protection. So there is a bit of a change in language we're seeing, so we're choosing to adopt that. And then again, just the physical distancing, ensuring that we meet those physical distancing requirements throughout all our different locations, enforcing safety rules and supporting contact tracing. So we are doing screening. If any of you have been to town hall, or I think even the liquor store, or a couple other locations where you have to fill out your screening, that will be done at all branches and all individuals going into all of our branches daily, every time they come in. And again, just looking at how we can really rethink our spaces, rethink our technology, rethink just about everything in the library to make sure things are touchless, how people access it. It is a matter of going through just about every procedure that we have and really taking a hard look at it and be like, how can we maybe adapt that so that we're not necessarily passing a lot of paper back and forth, or we're not necessarily passing library cards back and forth. How can we kind of adapt that through? And then, of course, protecting staff at customer service points. What can we put in place when we welcome the public back into our spaces? And then under other measures, we really talk about the fluidity and flexibility that is the situation and how things keep changing. We do not have all the resources. We have a ton of resources, don't get me wrong. We have a lot of guidelines coming at us, but what we don't have right now is library-specific guidelines. We have been told that they're coming, but until that, we have been basically looking at other sector guidelines. I mentioned retail. We've looked at retail distribution. There is a set of guidelines on curbside specifically, and adopting those to our procedures and health and safety documents as we go through until we actually get the library-specific ones. But these are just some of the different areas that we are consulting with and are helping to govern our decision-making. So just before I end and take questions, this is just some of the images that we're looking to use for the library takeout service. You'll start to see this go out tomorrow, and then the first round is Tuesday, June 9th. We are starting, it's not necessarily a soft launch because we will promote it, but we are conscious of that will be the first day that staff will be in it. So let's get them in, let's get them prepped, let's make it available to the public, but then really promote it next week to expect that it'll pick up a little bit. So we are excited to offer that service. And then just an idea of what we're looking at for Glen Abbey, just as an example of how we're gonna run this. So you see that the blue is the library takeout and the red is the materials return, just delineating where people are and putting in the physical distancing barriers just to kind of guide that process, in one door, out another. But this should all go out on those 3 locations, Glen Abbey, Iroquois Ridge, and Woodside, starting tomorrow. And I know the signage is also being printed and will be ready for Tuesday. So we're excited to get back and start allowing customers access to our services, even if it is right now just materials return and physical material. But we know that there's a large number of people out there who aren't comfortable with digital or don't like digital or just can't access digital. So allowing access to physical materials is a huge step forward, and we're very excited to offer that. So that's just a quick overview of our recovery strategy. I went into a bit more detail in the report, but I am absolutely happy to take questions about this.
Thank you.
I have one.
That's extremely exciting. Any questions?
Yeah, well, I don't have a question. Can I just make a point?
Yes, Bill.
You could always sell OPL masks.
Yeah, that's actually been chatted about, so.
Fundraiser. Yeah.
We're actually talking about
Might be a good idea.
the clips, right? Because you can 3D print the clips that go in the back because they hurt your ears.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to say is, I don't know if you guys have been to Costco lately, but, have you seen like this whole sanitizing issue, which is huge there? And I don't know if that means it's just because that's the way Costco is, but, they basically wash down that entire, when you check out, they sanitize that whole, the conveyor belt and everything. So, are you expecting to have to do that kind of sanitizing, like basically nonstop all day long? You know, any surfaces that people might touch in a library, because that could be.
Yeah, we've attempted to find a balance of where we are doing it safely, but staff aren't necessarily standing there sanitizing. So the way it happens is that every half hour, there's a table out in the vestibule, and every half hour, staff put out that next half hour's holds. They're in paper bags, like library takeout, with their hold slip kind of stapled to it. And then every half hour, they will wipe down that table before they put out the new materials. As for example, the materials return, the sorters will only get wiped down every day. So the materials will get returned. It is done touchless by staff, so the material kind of sorts into bins. The bins are then, the lids go on them and they're put for quarantine. And then at the end of the day, the machine itself is sanitized according to the directions from the vendor.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Bill. I have a question. Does somebody else have a question? Andrew, I'll go last.
Tara, excellent work. Thank you very much for all the effort and thought that you put into it and for taking us through it. I just have a question about how we're communicating this to the community, because I'm browsing the OPO website right now. When I go on the homepage, there's absolutely no mention about reopening. I have to click on COVID-19 updates, and then there's on the right-hand side under the news bar, there's a tiny little headline that says contactless holds coming soon. And I'm just wondering, like, we should be, I feel, saying this loud and proud everywhere that we have a plan. It's coming, imminently, and I think it's something for people to get excited about. Go ahead.
So I was going to say, absolutely. I will say that we have learned some lessons from libraries who have gone before us. There are a number of libraries who've opened starting the end of May up until now, and they did a really strong promotion in advance, and they got slammed the first couple days and were completely overwhelmed. So that's one of the reasons that we're taking a bit more of a soft launch. That'll change tomorrow, Andrew, and it'll be some teasers that'll go out, as well as the newsletter that'll go out tomorrow. And then people will get their email notices that their holds are ready, because we are starting with the holds that we had before we closed. And then we're going to clear those out before we start filling new holds. So it is a little bit of expectation management as well, that people aren't going to expect that if I placed a hold last week, I'm going to get it, because it could be a couple weeks before you do we get to that point. So we are excited, and we are excited to announce it, but you will see a really strong communication push next week. Just a kind of an effort just to kind of manage some of that load. We do have over 60,000 items out, and if we get those all back in the first week, it's going to be a problem.
Right. Okay, that's fair. Secondly, and this is a much broader sort of observation, but fundamentally, libraries are not just collections of materials. They're about discovery and experience, and we don't know how long we're going to be in what state, and those phases obviously are very big in terms of timing, and rightly so. I want to challenge you and your staff to think about how we can reincorporate the discovery aspect into the library, even while we have to deal with these complications and barriers basically to access. I don't know that there are any easy answers, but as much as we can kind of promote the library as a, continue to promote it as a key aspect of the community and a place to discover and learn and connect, I think is crucial. So if there's a way to sort of, let people browse, and discover, I bring it up maybe without a lot of context, but I find it, and I'm fairly familiar with the library, but I find it overwhelming to try and see what the possibilities are in terms of, children's programming, the story times, resources, different reference materials, and how do we simplify and let people explore virtually, which we may be looking at this for a year or 2 years, or who knows. So that's sort of a very open, long-winded challenge to staff to see how can we make this an element of connecting with the library ongoing.
Perfect. Yep, we'll take that challenge.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Further? Janet? Can we unmute Councillor Hazlefield, please?
Tara, could you just go back to that slide that says library takeout? I'm not sure if the image has now been updated, but it had a comment about materials return, and materials return and library takeout are all at the three locations, correct?
Correct.
The one before that, the slide before that.
Okay. Yeah. Hold on. Oh. Okay. Now I made it angry. Can you just go to 11? Thank you.
That's it. So at the bottom it says library materials are not returned here. Please return them to the designated return locations.
Oh, that's simply where the sign itself is going to be located. So that sign is actually, if I go to the next one. So you see
okay.
where the library takeout sign, if you go straight down the blue, we're just indicating that it's not being returned where you grab the library takeout, it's being returned at the returns. Yeah, so it's just the location of the sign to indicate that returns aren't to be returned on the table where you're grabbing your library takeout. They do have to go through the check-in stations. Yeah.
I was thinking you meant another library.
That'd be
oh
weird.
no, you don't want them
No.
to go to another library.
Yeah.
Okay. My second comment is you and I had a discussion offline about the central branch and how it's got 1/3, like it's number 3 in circulation and users. And there are some physical space challenges in how you can execute this phase 1 approach. And I've had some time to think about it. And I would really like to see a bit more of a concerted approach to trying to use, even if it's just the upper floor vestibule, to do something, not in the first couple of weeks, everybody has to get their feet under them, but we have a compelling need to meet. There's a high demand at Central. It's not as high as Glen Abbey or Iroquois Ridge. Woodside is not close to Central in terms of physical distance. We also want people to be downtown. One of the most important elements of downtown has been that, thousands of people visit the library and then they connect with the downtown merchants. And so the sooner we can get to some level of service in the Central Library, it just, it's synergistic to what we're trying to accomplish with downtown. So I share that with the other board members, and you were very helpful in the conversation. It's a miss not to be able to provide some level of modified service at the Central Branch.
No, agreed, and it would definitely be part of the next phase of branches that would bring up, but again, as you and I kind of chatted, and just for the information of the rest of the board, that we really looked at the 3 branches that what brought up were some of the easiest and to adapt to this type of service in order to bring it up quickly. The other branches are a bit more challenging. Central, simply because of the 2 doors and just some of the physicality of the space itself. And then Woodside, White Oaks, and Clearview, because of our relationship with the school board, those conversations are ongoing. And then 16 Mile is just too small. We didn't want to necessarily start with that, but these are the 3 that we could start with quickly, and then we would bring more on board as soon as possible once we get a sense of what the demand is and what is working and not working in terms of those services. So absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything further? I have a question. A couple questions. First of all, the comments with respect in the written report with respect to physical distancing. So this generally reflects the physical distancing related to guests or customers of the library. What about staff? Will staff be able to physically distant in their work?
Yeah, that also went into our choice of branches, and that's why Glen Abbey and Iroquois Ridge were kind of great options in and of themselves, because they do allow staff to maintain physical distancing where possible, and allowing them to kind of like adopt some different spaces in there, but having those large branches, and then Woodside as well. We had staff really review and figure out, when they're performing the tasks that they're required, where they could physical distance, and the leaders will be very, very sure to monitor that, and kind of manage it where we can.
Okay. What about personal protective equipment, PPE? What is the availability to staff for PPE, hand sanitizer, all those gloves, et cetera? I see that it says following guidance from the town of Oakville, but what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with the sanitizer. As everybody who's trying to get sanitizer these days, it's definitely a challenge. The town purchasing department deserves pretty significant kudos for the sourcing that they've been doing, and doing it as for the entire corporation. We do have an agreement with the town that we can use their stores for at least for now, in order to be able to access some of that. We have been able to access some of it ourselves, but knowing that we have access to the town stores is really beneficial. There's been a lot of movement regarding PPE, or as we now call it, source control. The current policy for the town, and forgive me, because it just got updated on Monday, we will supply masks where staff work and cannot maintain physical distancing for 15 minutes or more, and there is no physical barrier. So under those circumstances, we would have masks that staff would be able to access. Now, it is policy that they can bring their own, but should they, for example, we do require that staff do team lifts, so materials handling. Some of the bins get quite heavy. They have to do it together, two of them. That is one of our existing health and safety procedures. So in that case, they cannot maintain the 6 feet. So in those cases, we would look to supply a mask if they do not have one, because if it meets that criteria.
Okay. So so they have to be not able to secure physical distancing for 15 minutes before they're eligible to get a mask from the town stores, or from the library stores. That
is the policy, and Colleen might be able to speak to it better than I
Okay,
can.
before I go to
If
Colleen,
she's willing, I don't.
Yeah, before I go to Colleen, so I mean, the medical officer of health for the province, the CDC, everybody is making it really clear that it's important to be wearing masks. I mean, we're not wearing masks in this chamber because we are considerably distant from one another, and there's no chance we're going to come into contact. But in that environment, you're exposed to, I assume that you're going to, that some of the staff will be within a reasonable distance of customers when they're replenishing the table and such as well, right? So citizens are going to see our staff.
Yes.
Okay. And do you feel confident that most of our staff have masks, or I guess I'm just concerned that we're not providing masks for complete use, like for anybody that needs them in that environment. They're not an expensive item, and certainly, in light of the fact that you know the mayor, our staff, councillors, everybody is saying, please wear a mask when you're not in your bubble. When you go shopping, wear a mask. When you're pretty much anywhere. I was at the Black Lives Matter protests. Everybody was wearing a mask. So I don't understand why we wouldn't be providing that to our staff on demand if they require it. You go to Whole Foods and they hand you a mask if you don't have one. So I don't see why we wouldn't take that extra step. Is there a reason why we couldn't do that?
Not if we want to follow town policy. So I'm just looking to Colleen to see if she wants to comment.
Colleen has her finger up, so can we unmute Colleen? Hello, Commissioner.
Hello. So the mask issue has been an ongoing debate. As you know, over the last few months, the messaging on masks has evolved. If you remember, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was recommended that you only wear a mask if you were ill, and that a mask was a signal to other people that you were in fact ill. And that's now evolved. So there's sort of a number of issues in play right now. At this moment in time, if a person is able to control the social distancing, which the library at this point in time believes that they can, then masks, we are not required to provide masks. Where we do provide masks right now is in instances for inspections where you may be going into a private residence where you don't know what you're walking into and you may not be able to social distance. I will say that masks are a standing item at EMT, and we review the issue of masks on basically a weekly and sometimes daily basis. Right now, we are looking at the Ministry of Transport Canada's request for people to wear masks on any form of transport, and legally, how easy is that going to be to enforce? So we're dealing with both the issues of the public wearing masks and whether or not we should require them to wear masks. And we're also looking at an ongoing basis on what we're doing in regard to providing masks or allowing staff to bring their own masks. So my suggestion would be that we have this as an ongoing standing item because things may evolve over time. They've evolved quite drastically from when COVID first became a global pandemic.
Mm-hmm. So this is as you're for what I surmise, this is a global policy for the town and library staff that's being employed right now, correct? So this isn't just library, this is the town as well. And this debate that's gone on reflects both organizations at EMT. Yes? I don't have Colleen's voice microphone on. Thank you.
No, that's correct.
Yeah, okay.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
I guess, so ultimately, what is the argument for not providing them at this point? Is it simply cost and availability or?
Well, it's a number of factors. Certainly cost, it actually, it's less cost, it's more availability, to be quite honest. What a lot of staff would prefer, if anyone's worn the non-surgical mask, which we do have a very good supply, but they really dig into your face after a period of time and they're quite uncomfortable. And as we move into the summer season, if you're outside with one of those masks on, it's going to be unpleasant. A lot of staff are much more interested in cloth masks because they're more environmentally sensitive. You can wash them and they don't dig into your face in the same way. So right now we're looking at sourcing cloth masks because we know that that's the type of mask that the majority of staff is much more interested in wearing, partially because of comfort and the environmental aspect. So the availability issue has really dominated. When the issue of masks first came up, there was a shortage. And so everyone was frantically trying to source all manner of PPE, hand sanitizer and wipes. We also anticipate is going to be an issue going forward as businesses open. So far, we have quite a good supply of sanitizer and wipes, but we anticipate we will probably end up in a bit of a shortage on that because of the rush of every business workplace that reopens with in-person service, that they will want to buy up a hand sanitizer and wipes as well. Mm-hmm. So we're constantly looking at sourcing new suppliers. We're trying to anticipate where the market is going to go and what the availability is. So as I said, it's one of the reasons why it is essentially an item on EMT almost daily. And when we are running the EOC meetings, which are 3 times a week, Enrico Scalera, who oversees all PPE in stores, gives an update on exactly what our inventory is and where we might be running low. And he's constantly working closely with purchasing to ensure that we're trying to find more local suppliers, to be quite honest. Mm-hmm. It's probably been one of the single biggest challenges of COVID is managing this particular issue. And as I said, we are constantly revising and reviewing where we're at, particularly in transit. Now our specialized transit drivers wear face shields. So, face shields has come up as an issue as well. Right. So it's a learning curve for all of us.
I mean, I mean, this is a policy across the board, but I mean, how many town staff at this point are customer facing? I guess that's my concern, is that we're going to be asking the library staff to be dealing with materials to a large extent that have been in people's homes, have been in people's hands recently. They'll be exposed to the customer side of things. They'll be lifting things, as Tara was suggesting, in unison and not being able to socially distance. It feels a little insensitive not to provide a mask if a staff member needs a mask on demand.
So, Mr. Chair, I would certainly be happy to take back the input from the board on their concerns around masks for staff. You've actually asked a really interesting question. Because we have moved so decisively to a touchless environment as much as possible, there are actually not a lot of in-person transactions happening right now.
Yeah.
So it's confined almost exclusively to transit. Fire, who always had prescribed PPE, so that's a slightly different situation. And beyond that, there's a very small group of staff that interact with the public who deal with marriage licenses, for example, receiving documents from the outside. But to a very large extent, like our planning, building, development, engineering departments who would have been interacting really heavily with the public and who are at full service are not doing anything beyond virtual or over the telephone. Right now, recreation is all virtual or over the telephone. However, we do know both in the case of the library and recreation, that will start to change, and we will need to review this on an ongoing basis because we're making some assumptions, and we'll have to test those assumptions on an ongoing basis to make sure that they're valid in the new environment. So I would be happy to take that back.
I much appreciated. I'm going to let somebody else talk in just a second, but my concern with taking it back is that we're opening Monday, right?
Tuesday.
So I'm just concerned. I mean, it may not even be an issue. I may be making a mountain out of a molehill, and I hope I am. But I'm just concerned that we be in a situation where the public's it could very well be their first re-exposure to a town service or library service, and our staff may not be following because they don't have access. They may not be following the guidelines of Public Health Ontario and all the other folks that are saying, for goodness sakes, wear a mask. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, wear a mask. I mean, that's kind of the mantra, right? So is there anything we can do on an interim basis to provide a supply of masks so that staff obviously encourage them to buy a mask of their choice, because I think that's probably...
So we could certainly provide a small supply, but it would not be cloth masks because that's an area that we're struggling to source.
Yeah, no,
it would be the uncomfortable ones, I'll be honest.
That's fine.
But we could certainly look at a small supply just to get started and see whether or not they're needed or not.
I would appreciate that. I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues and see if they have any further feedback on this or maybe additional requests. Councillor Hazard-Thiel, I saw your hand up first.
Jeff, thank you for raising that. One suggestion I would have is to empower people to get their own cloth mask. Yeah. I've seen businesses do that. They've gone back to them and said, look, getting volume is challenging. Having your own cloth mask means it's personally yours. You're washing it. You're responsible for it. Get one for every day of the week if you need to. Some businesses have given them a stipend that said, this is how much we're prepared to contribute to it. And because it's small supply, people can get access to it. Mm-hmm. Whereas this large supply, it is mind-blowing because you're right. I mean, sourcing has become, a nightmare. So that would be one, because I do think in the initial stages, consistency of message, which is they are facing a customer, unless they are truly 6 feet back all the time, not beside, not coming. they should be wearing one until somebody says, you know, enough, we don't need to do this anymore.
So one thing I did want to clarify is that staff are have always been allowed to bring in their own mask from a comfort perspective. So if someone said, I'm really uncomfortable and I want to wear a mask and I want to bring in my own mask, they are able to do that.
So then let's just, I mean, I would suggest that Tara, you know, in their, you know, says to them, listen, you know, there is a sourcing challenge, there's a comfort challenge, you know, you need to go out and make, you know, get on Etsy, get on all these different, there are sites that the smaller supplies are available. Just food for thought. I do concur that we will have a public, a confused public if if the library staff are not wearing masks when we do this, when we open up.
Thank you, Councillor. Further? Okay, I don't see anything further. I appreciate the commitment by Colleen, Commissioner Bell, to provide a supply of masks in the interim and to review with, I guess, EMT or your other colleagues how we go forward with this. I mean, I had suggested that the library management recommend to the staff that they get a mask of their choice. I think that makes a lot of sense. Councillor Hazard-Thiel said the same thing. I think it's ideal, but I just want to make sure that we've got an access to supply if they forget it, if they can't get one, or whatever the case might be. I just think that that's really important. I think for consistency of messaging from a public health perspective and for the safety of our staff, because I don't know where this 15 minutes of exposure comes from, but I've never heard anybody in public health say that 15 minutes of exposure within 6 feet is healthy right now. I mean, if somebody sneezes, they sneeze, whether it's, you know, 2 minutes or 2 hours. So it's, I don't think you can tell when you're going to be exposed to the virus. So I do appreciate that commitment. Members of the board, I have a proposed resolution here that staff have prepared for item number 12, that we approve this recovery strategy in principle. Councillor Hazard-Thiel, you're moving that? Sound on, please.
Yes, I'd be pleased to move it, but I did have one further question just about the library air circulation. Some businesses have gone and done some due diligence around how the air exchanges are working in the spaces, and the number of times the fresh air really rotates through. So, for example, you know, if I use the Exchange Tower downtown, a suite in the Exchange Tower changes that gets fresh air 4 times an hour, and there are LEED standards that are out there around how the air circulates, and the air circulation for those that stay in the same space for a long period of time is considered to be a factor in potential risk. I wondered if is that been looked at by facilities at the libraries?
Yeah, town facilities has looked at that. I do know that there's been a process of cleaning out the ducts at some of the facilities. I know they were doing it at Iroquois Ridge when I was there a couple weeks ago. And I do know that that's something they are looking at. I don't necessarily have a lot of detail on what they are doing, but I can definitely bring that back next board meeting, because there's a lot of things that facilities is looking at for the libraries as well as the recreation centers and the other public buildings, because that's definitely something that's been flagged as air quality.
Perfect, thank you.
Can I ask Councillor Bell if she wants to comment? Oh, she's already acknowledging. Go ahead.
I just wanted to let you know that the town has put together a playbook which really highlights it's a development of a series of guidelines for us to how we manage our facilities going forward. In addition to that, the National Recreation Facilities Association has also put out really extensive guidelines that would be very applicable to a library setting. They're a little more enhanced because of the focus on public interaction. So we would be happy to share that. So for the libraries where they are co-located with the recreation facilities, they should be operating to the same standard on that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anything further? Okay, the approval in principle. Why are we approving this in principle?
Just because I wasn't sure, because it's not locked in stone. This is just an overarching strategy, and it may change. I didn't want to approve it, but I felt that it locked it. It locked it down.
Understood. Okay. Members of the board, can I get a motion to approve in principle? Councillor Haslett-Thiel, Susan, all in favor? That's carried. Super excited about this, guys. I think this is a really cool step forward.
Yeah, we're excited.
Yeah. Website update.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So Angie, you made a great point about digital discovery. It was a perfect segue for the website update. So while the branches have been closed, we've been diligently working on the website. There's a team from OPL, a team from IS, and of course our vendors have been working throughout the branch closures. Proud to say that we've received one of the final packages from our vendor to actually download within our server and begin user testing of the new website. We're in the middle of that process, so there has been bugs we found, and this is expected to go kind of back and forth for a while as we look to complete the bugs and kind of go back and forth and fix the website. But essentially, we're on track. You see in one of the appendix the actual project timeline, which we are. And the good news is that we're hoping that the board can have a chance to see and test the new website at the end of the month with a launch date of early August. So I open it up to the board for any questions about the new website.
Any questions? No? Somebody like to move the receipt of the report, please? This is receipt, right?
Yes, receipt for information.
Pankage, did you have a question or are you moving? Okay, moved by Pankage, seconded by Stephen. Okay, all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elimination of overdue fines for 2020.
Okay. I wanted to bring this forward, given some of the challenges that Oakville residents are facing due to COVID-19. I thought this would be a really beneficial thing to do for the community. Not only will it hopefully help encourage use of our physical materials, there is also a challenge that with our physical branches closed, people are only able to pay their fines online. And as we start to circulate physical materials again, some of the restrictions that we had in place will be back into effect. We lifted them for the electronic resources because there is next to no risk. Those are managed through digital management. So when the due date comes, you lose access and it automatically goes back and access for the next person. Whereas physical materials is a bit more challenging and does have, and needs to actually be physically returned for that to come back. So those were two of the reasons that I wanted to bring this forward. We've been talking a lot about this at the Canadian Urban Library Council, and it is something that Burlington and Halton Hills boards have already passed. So I definitely wanted to bring it forward for consideration to the OPL board. Recognizing the financial situation that we do find ourselves, as well as the town finds ourselves, we are lucky enough to have our development fund. And generally, annually, we pull in about $100,000 from our development fund in order to support pilot projects or different initiatives through the library. That'll be greatly restricted this year just due to the circumstances we find ourselves. In my opinion, it would be a great use of that money to supplement out our finances in order to eliminate the fines for the rest of 2020. And I also ask whether or not the board, because we already done this in terms of the children's fines, and whether or not the board wants us to look at the permanent elimination of fines as part of the 2021 budget process. There are a number of libraries that are doing that as well. So I wanted to bring that forward as an option for the board to consider.
Okay, members of the board, questions? Are we in favor of this? Andrew?
Sarah, sorry if I missed it. Can you just explain briefly how, are you still tracking the amount of the fines, but then they're just being waived at the time the material's returned, or how does that work?
So once we closed the branches, there were no fines to be accrued. So we did not start accruing fines for individuals, mostly because we just pushed out the due date. So nothing was due, therefore nothing was ever late, so you didn't accrue a fine. So since we closed, when we decide not to, we are not accruing any fines currently.
Okay, I guess
since
what I
March
mean is
14th.
it says OPL customers who reach a $25 threshold of fines are blocked from accessing library services. So how are you calculating the $25 threshold is my question.
Yeah, so as people generate fines or fees or other kind of restrictions through the system, through our integrated library system, once they reach a total of 25, their access is blocked and they're no longer allowed to use computers or borrow materials until they pay that below the $25 threshold.
Okay, so if we don't accrue any fines, I mean, maybe I'm just not understanding it, but at what point, like if someone just keeps material out indefinitely, at what point do we say, okay, you got to bring that back and you can't take anything else out for now?
So interestingly enough, there are a number of libraries throughout North America in particular who have eliminated fine over the past number of years. And this is one of a key concern that does come up and doesn't actualize in any kind of real way. People do bring their items back. And I think the anxiousness we've seen since we've been closed about people to return their materials definitely highlights that, because that is one of the number one questions we get is, when can I bring it back?
You got nothing on the beer store.
So where it is, I'm not saying it's not a problem, it hasn't been. It isn't a problem to a very high level and can be managed normally with a conversation. It is the same as what we've done with the children's, right? When we eliminated the children's fines, once you reach a certain point, you do get one. It's just not necessarily, then it becomes, and Simona can speak to it more than I can, a lost book, and then you're charged for it. So it isn't necessarily fines, it's more of a charge. To help manage that. So there is something still in place. It's just not a 25 cents a day kind of charge.
Okay, no, that does clarify things. Yeah, I mean, there's sort of a side question in there, which is, it would be interesting to see any updates on the children's fines. But I mean, I'm personally of the belief that you need to set expectations, like of children especially. So if there's never a consequence, though, they won't necessarily learn, like, it's important to return these on time, right? But you're saying that there's a lot of data to support the idea that it rarely becomes an issue. So that's reassuring. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't think we were going to bring a report on the impact of children's fines at a previous board meeting. We can bring that back in July. There just wasn't time to get that done for this board meeting. And Andrew, definitely that's actually one of the biggest conversations that libraries have when they start to eliminate fines and children's fines. And it's kind of a roundabout argument about whether or not it's up to the library to teach that level of responsibility, and where does that kind of lie. But again, it's not a debate that I think we necessarily want to engage in, but it still has a due date, right? It still has an expected date for it to come back, and it really is up to the individual to honor that or not.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Stephen. Turn on Mr. Wright. There we go.
Hi, and sorry for the candid guest appearance from my daughter, but 20 minutes ago, it was her moment of fame doing the little thing. I'm alive to Andrew's concerns. You do want to get the books back, but I do recall that we got some tremendous goodwill in announcing this on Family Day a couple of years ago. And for what it's worth, from my perspective, I think given the COVID claustrophobia that a lot of people have and will have for a long, long time, I think the cost of goodwill and $31,000 or $37,000, I think is well worth it. I personally would be in favor of abolishing the fines altogether, especially if other libraries are going down that road, and it sounds like it would not be very difficult for us to go down that road. But anyway, I just wanted to express my support for that I think the benefits of it would be much greater than the financial loss, especially given Tara's opening comments on this agenda item, that we have the financial resources to close that gap. So just a comment, not a question.
Thank you, Stephen. Anything further? Councillor Hazelfield? Oh, she's muted.
Okay.
No, you're not.
There we go. So recommendation 1, I can totally get my head around. It makes perfect sense to waive to the end of the year. and I could potentially get my head around a deferral into 2021 for a period of time. I'm not convinced that adults should be treated the same as the children in terms of fines. One solution is to raise the fine threshold, that it's not 25 that would block them, it would be 100 at some point that might block them. But I certainly would be prepared to support one. Two, I would want to have a greater discussion about. As much as there's development money that would be available to supplement this, there are also additional costs that are going to occur being able to run in a post-COVID world. And in terms of digital acquisitions can continue to climb. So I remain a little bit concerned about the financial picture of our organization, not just our residents. So one makes perfect sense to me. Two, I would want to have a longer conversation.
Thank you, Councillor.
Two is really bringing back a report with different options for the board. It's really just allowing us to explore those options and bring them back to the board for approval. It's definitely not an endorsement that we go that way, but that rather we take the opportunity, particularly after this year and the financial situation, for all it's worth, for all the challenges it's faced, as actually an opportunity to potentially look at this long term. So that's really what that second piece is for us, the board, to direct us to come back with some different options, looking at that if that's the will of the board.
Yeah, no, there's no commitment. We're just looking at audit. This is something we started years ago on the board, and we, as Stephen alluded to, we've had a lot of success with the children's piece, but certainly we need to know the numbers. That fine revenue is dropping considerably every year. As we introduce more electronic materials, it's going to continue to drop, I imagine.
Yeah, I think it was in Jonathan's report, it drops about 5% a year. So I think over the past 5 years, so it is a decreasing revenue for sure. And I think it's really more important for the library to look at new revenue avenues that are supportable and long-term.
When you bring this back, can you also bring back maybe a summary of how we've done with the children's program?
Absolutely,
Because it would be a great way to analyze the impact.
Yeah, I know Simona's already started it, and we'll definitely bring it back at the next board meeting.
That's great.
Yeah.
Anything further, members of the board? Would somebody like to move these two recommendations, please? Bill and Stephen, any further discussion, comments, questions? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Meeting attendance. This is the sad portion of the meeting.
Paul had some words he wanted me to share. So, Paul McIntyre Royston has resigned from the board effective May 31st. So he was sad not to be able to join us tonight. But he did. I'm just going to read it. Please pass on to the board that I wish them all the best and greatly enjoyed our dialogues and discussions. I will miss it greatly, and good luck to everybody. So those are Paul's words, and I know he will be missed. But he is now no longer a resident of Oakville.
So, in other words, ineligible to be on the board.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Are we required to accept the resignation? Okay, so I need a motion to accept his resignation with utter sadness. Utter sadness, I'm just adding. Janet, and seconded by? Bill seems sad. Okay, seconded by you, Bill. All in favor? And that's carried. And on behalf of the board and everybody, if Paul, you're listening, I hope you are, and getting set up in your new community. I want to thank you for your participation on this board, your advice, your guidance, and your good humor. We're going to miss you greatly, and good luck in your future. CEO update. And Stephen says goodbye as well.
Oh, no, can I say something quickly?
Sure.
I don't want to take up much time here, but it's germane to this point. Maybe it's a future agenda item.
Sure.
But with respect to recruitment, we've lost a couple, obviously a couple people of late, and just wondering what the recruitment strategies might be in terms of, timing, diversity, and all that kind of stuff.
I think that there's a recruitment process that is administered to the clerk's department here at the town of Oakville. because it is an Oakville council appointment. And I believe that we had started the recruitment but suspended it because of COVID. Is that correct? Yeah, Kathy Patrick, who is sitting in the audience, is nodding her head. So once we are back, we will resume that recruitment. And then the process basically is the applications come in, staff will have a look at the various skills that are being provided or being offered, and recommendations will be made to council. Council will make those appointments in consultation with the staff and the chair. So that is the process. Councillor Hazathiel. Please unmute, Councillor Hazathiel. Thank you. I need a button push every time you come on.
I would like to encourage us to ensure that we find someone who has the fundraising and the public library experience that Paul had. I mean, it was tremendous what he brought to the conversations, his experience, and if there's somebody in the pool that would have that level of expertise, I think it would add greatly to the board.
So if you're watching and you have some spare time and you have some fundraising experience and you know a little bit about libraries, we can't wait to hear from you. So there's the commercial pitch. I agree with you. We years ago decided that the board should be a skills-based board, and members of the board should be chosen not just for their good deeds, which is obviously an important thing, but also for the skills that they can bring to the table. And everybody has a piece of that. So your sentiments are well regarded. Moving on to our CEO update.
Absolutely. Just to that last point, Paul has agreed to continue to support the fundraising committee in the interim while we're looking for new board members. So we aren't losing that skill set completely quite yet. So we do thank him for that.
Terrific.
So I do have my CEO update. I just wanted to provide some kind of random highlights that I felt the board would find interesting. One being the town halls that I've been doing for all staff. I'm hosting another one on Monday, and we'll basically do a similar presentation on the OPL recovery strategy that I just provided the board. I have been giving them snippets of information as we're going through. I send out communications to all staff on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but I do like to touch base with them in person regularly. So we've had a number of Zoom calls, and they've been relatively well attended. And the next one is Monday. I'm also participating in a number of different groups. Everybody is very active right now. The Canadian Urban Library Council is meeting weekly, and that's been great to see what the approaches have been nationally across the entire board, to hear what everybody is doing in terms of staff and procedures and processes. And it is amazing to see how many different ways you can do the exact same thing. But it's great having those discussions and just seeing where the different provinces are at. There's representation from every single province across, and everybody's at different phases of their recovery. So it is really interesting to speak with them, as well as the chief executives of large urban public libraries, which is mostly entirely Ontario group. So we share a lot of information as well, which has been really, really good. I kind of gave a hint already about summer reading and Beanstack. And I also meet weekly with the CEOs of Halton Hills, Burlington, and Milton as we try and coordinate as much as possible, because we know we have people that use all four of us, and actually Mississauga, I talked to the CEO of Mississauga quite a bit as well. Again, just sharing information and trying to coordinate as best possible. I do have a couple more items. Again, this is prepared a little bit early. So I just, if we can bring the screen up, thank you. So timely, actually we had a Canadian Urban Library Council meeting today, and this was brought up, and it was recommended that all the different CEOs take this to their board to reaffirm. And I think it is very timely given our current circumstances, and speaks to where we want to go and how libraries want to situate ourselves in the terms of race and social equity. So this is the Canadian Urban Library Council statement on race and social equity. It was created 2 years ago, I think. We are looking at reviewing it, but during the discussion today, we think it stands, and that I would ask the board, I'm going to be trying to read that, but the next is basically a motion asking the board to just endorse this statement, and then a list of all the different libraries that have endorsed this will be added to the CULC website to stand united across the country in our efforts to stop racism and to deliver on social equity.
Is that the end?
Yes, yeah, I was going to give you time to read it. Sorry, the motion's on the next one, but I don't want to move it, obviously, until you guys,
Oh, okay,
I
fair
never
enough,
ask
fair
you to endorse something without reading it, and I apologize for not getting it to you in advance, but that conversation was today, and I think getting this endorsed sooner and then waiting necessary to our next board meeting, although if the board wants to defer it, I'm at their will.
Okay, members of the board, I can't actually see you at the moment, but, well, there you all are. Has everybody had a chance to read that? Does anybody have any issue with it? Are we prepared to consider a motion to adopt it? I'm assuming by the total lack of any gestures whatsoever that that's a yes. So let's go on and have a look at the motion for a moment, please. Okay, let's go back to our meeting. My opinion, this is very timely and I think a very worthy position to take as a library board, and I for one would be in favor of it. Would somebody have a contrary opinion, or somebody like to give me a motion to approve? Okay, Susan, thank you. Janet seconded. One last time for comments, questions? All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, Stephen has a question, or he's just saying hello.
So that's my signature move now, apparently.
Okay.
So just a quick question. I'm all in favor of it, and we'll be voting such. But is this meant to live somewhere? Like, is it being printed up in branches? Yeah. Is it on our website? How does it manifest itself?
Yeah, so that's part of the conversation. So we're going to endorse it, and that's one of the big conversations that we had as part of CULC today, and it'll continue on. Is we have this statement, you know, and it was created in 2018. It's kind of lived there. We're looking to re-endorse it. It'll absolutely be put on our website. But now, really, the conversation turns. We can't just endorse it. We need to live it. And how do we do that? How do we take this statement and weave it through everything that we do? And that's definitely what's going to be happening. I do believe that Canadian Urban Library Council, they're looking at forming a task force to really make recommendations, but also that all libraries really need to take a really strong look at our procedures, our processes, all our infrastructure, and really have a really hard look at it and how we might be playing into the organization or the societal structures that are being questioned around the world right now. The Ontario Library Association also came out with some recommendations on what libraries should be doing to make sure that we're not just talking the talk, that we're going to walk the walk, and we think libraries should be leaders in this area. Creating diversity and inclusion is what we do. Education is what we do, and we should definitely be leaders on this. Pilar Martinez, who is CEO of Edmonton, also shared a number of policies that her library has on diversity and inclusion, social equity and such, and so we'll take a look at those and potentially bring some of those back to the board for consideration, because I think they're important for us to have, and we don't currently have those.
Thank you. Anything further? Okay, I'm sorry, Andrew, yes.
Can I just suggest that it's definitely, as Tara said, important to make the statement. It's more important to actually follow through and enact it. And can I suggest that be one of the topics in our strategic plan that we're planning to do sometime, I hope. But I think just how does that actually live at the OPL?
That's a wonderful idea. Staff have already nodded, and we're going to make sure that's on the agenda.
Well, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Further? All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Anything further, Madam CEO? No? Okay, I know it's going to bring a tear to everybody's eye, but this was the last item on our agenda today. I'll ask the board if there's any new business to come before the board this evening. Councillor Haslett-Thiel. Please turn on, Councillor Haslett-Thiel. Thank you. You're live.
I have just one question for Tara, and that's I had a reach out from a former staff member of the library around Creative Bug, which is a craft software program, and the curiosity was around, could we use it in our virtual offerings? I guess it's a great tool for the crafty people who and can teach them how to do all different things. And I just wanted to ask, is it on our radar? Is it something that that we would explore in our virtual collections or our software offerings?
Sure, that staff member brought it forward to us as well. We did an investigation into it, and it does look like a solid piece of software. However, it does cost. So we did kind of look at what its cost was and what our circumstances were at the moment. And we kind of went a different way. We engaged with Hive and actually are doing craft meetups, as well as some of the creation challenges to try and meet some of those crafting needs. Creative Bug isn't off the table. I just feel that right now, spending the money on a new product, when I think the money could be spent in other areas, is better. At the moment, but it's definitely on the agenda. But I think we just have to look at it once we get a better sense of what budget is going to be.
Yeah, I only raise it and also in part because accessing the creation zone is going to be a lot trickier in this COVID world, and even probably post. And so an investment in virtual software that encourages something like that. I'm glad to hear you considered it.
Yeah, it's certainly not off the table. It's just us trying to get a better sense of where we stand budget-wise.
Thank you, Councillor. I do report that we dealt with our confidential consent item earlier on, which was just the adoption of our minutes from our previous confidential sessions. There are no confidential discussion items. That was new business, but I'll ask one more time for new business. Does anybody have anything else to bring before the board this evening? Seeing none, I announce that the next meeting is at the call of the chair. And Andrew, you saying goodbye, or you have a question?
Well, no, I wanted to ask because I thought this was the May 28th meeting, but maybe it's the June 23rd meeting. So I think you're about to explain where we are in the calendar.
Yes, I was going to do that. And to help me is our CEO. Can you assist with that question? Where are we in the calendar in terms of meetings?
That's a great question. We are so far off our calendar, I'm not sure I can make that determination. Okay. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that we need another board meeting in June unless it's the will of the chair, right. But we should look at scheduling potentially one for July, particularly once we get a better sense of what the budget process will look like. Okay.
I mean, we do have a couple items we've now put on the agenda, namely PPE and policy issues. So,
and there's a number of outstanding board reports in the outstanding board report that I indicated I would bring in July.
Okay, so let's, the CEO and I will confer and determine at what point we should have another meeting. So I call the chair for this moment. Thank you, Andrew. Nothing further. I am going to look for motion to adjourn. Nobody wants to adjourn. Okay, well, okay, there we go. Bill and Stephen, all in favor? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. That was a good meeting. We got lots done, and everybody stay safe and healthy, and we will see you real soon.